I'd like to welcome you to the Women in Science and Technology, the WIST, First Friday Forum. Today's forum, as you probably all know, is on networking, art, practice, and motivation. And we have our panel today is 4 of our senior managers here at the lab. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them and let them give you a 10 to 15 minute talk, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and discussion. So starting from your left to the right is Kristen Laurin-Kovitz. She is a principal mechanical engineer and section manager in the Nuclear Engineering Division. To Kirsten's left is Matt Howard. Matt is Argonne's Director of Communications, Education, and Public Affairs Division. To Matt's left is Ann Schlenker. Ann is the Director of the Center for Transportation Research in the Energy Systems Division. And finally, last but not least, is John Quintana, who is the Deputy Chief Operations Officer in the Office of the Director. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Kristen.
So hopefully my microphone is on now. Yeah, I'm Kristen, and let me tell you a little bit more about myself before I launch into the topic of networking. I actually came to the laboratory 20 years ago in 1993 as a graduate student. So I was a graduate student, and I moved to a postdoc position. Then I moved to an assistant mechanical engineer position, then to a principal mechanical engineer position, and most recently to a management position within our division. So if people have questions about networking at different levels in the laboratory, I might have some experience on that. So I wanted to give you that background. What I work on is non-proliferation and export controls, which is an international activity that I do. So I also have some insights maybe into interfacing with other cultures if that's of interest to people. So I sort of organized my talk, or my 10 minutes, around the questions that Lisa and Christina circulated that were in the blurb or the abstract for this talk. So I'll kind of work my way through some of those questions and try to answer them and from my experience. I'm sure that each of the panelists will have slightly different perspectives on networking and how they've utilized it in their careers. So the first question that they posed in that abstract was, what is networking? And frankly, when they asked me to talk on, be part of this panel, I thought, gosh, do I network? I mean, because I try not to think of it in such a formal manner. As a matter of fact, when I think about networking in the formal sense of the word, I get kind of nervous. I really am a little bit intimidated that I'm being a little bit of a saleswoman, and that doesn't feel comfortable to me and who I am personally. So I like to think of networking, when I reflected on it for this talk, about relationship building. So really, it's easier for me to meet people and get to know them without any sort of agenda. And then it turns out, after you've gotten to know people around the laboratory, in the DOE complex, that sort of thing, that those relationships help you, and you can help other people through those relationships. So it's been my practice not to be so much, very intentionally networking, but thinking about every interaction that I have with people as an opportunity to build a relationship and to get to know people a little bit better. So just like any other kind of relationship, though, networking takes some work. You have to have a little bit of a give and take. It shouldn't be a one-way sort of situation where I'm going to gain from this relationship with a person, but that person should be able to count on me as well. So I always try to approach my networking and my connection building from that respect. Not just is it what can I get from it, but what can I give to other people. These are the kinds of things that need to be nurtured. They're not things that you meet, you have this instant connection, and from now on you can rely on that person to help you advance your career or support you through difficult situations. You really have to nurture some of these relationships too. So when I look at networking, that's how I would define it. Also, I think that since I'm treating it like a relationship, I have to think about how I treat people generally. And I think that treating everybody with respect and in a professional manner is something you have to keep in mind when you're doing it as well. you'll be surprised that people that you think aren't influential at one point in your life become influential later. So treating everybody with respect from the get-go is a good practice, I think, when you're thinking about networking or relationship building related to your career. So the next question was, why network? So why would people want to do that? And everybody has different reasons. Maybe you're at a point in your career where you particularly need to make some change, and so you need a network to help you do that. So advancing your career can be one reason to network. And that can be from securing a different job position to identifying new opportunities for collaborating with people. At a place like Argonne, there's a lot of different kinds of work going on, and if you want to change the direction of your work or expand your work, there are a lot of people here that offer potential partnerships if you just reach out to them and seek out some opportunities for new collaborations. And over the time that I've been here, even I've noticed the increase in multidisciplinary approaches to research and scientific projects. So if you keep yourself isolated in your own division or group and you don't seek out new collaborations, chances are that it's not sustainable. So you might be you might network because you want to expand your opportunities for collaboration. Another reason you would network is, maybe you have certain challenges or problems that you have that are going on either personally or professionally, and you can learn from others' experience. So if you have people in your network who have gone through similar things, then they can help you through some of those issues as well. And one of the reasons that I also thought here was to develop a support system. It's really very difficult to be a scientist working in isolation these days, and there are lots of things in life that also impact your career and your ability to do science. And so networking and building these relationships can help build a support system that can sustain you through rough times. I think that people should think about establishing these connections not just vertically. I think we oftentimes think about networking up the chain, somebody who can, again, help us or we can gain something from, but we also have to think about networking horizontally amongst each other. I think the peer-to-peer relationships that you can build at the laboratory and throughout your career are the ones that are going to help you advance later on. And they may not even be relationships that you build based on work-related issues in the first place. So those are some of the reasons why people network, and I think how you should network. The next question in the abstract was, when is it useful to network? And I just wrote down with the exclamation point, always. It's always useful to network. The benefits to you and to anybody else that you might connect with may not be immediately apparent. So any opportunity you have to interact with people can be considered a networking opportunity, and so you should always be networking. And if you treat it the way I do as not, okay, I have an agenda of something I need right now, and it's something that's more a part of who you are and how you operate, then you're doing it all the time. You're trying to connect with people and build those relationships. And to me, that feels more honest and genuine than the artificial networking that can happen, at cocktail parties or whatever, So I feel a little bit more honest, and it's truer to myself when I do it that way. And I'll just reinforce again that I try to seek connections that not only will benefit me, but maybe that I can be the person who's providing a benefit to other people. I think that does a lot for me personally as well. You think when you're going to give or volunteer that it's going to be, only the recipient who gains from that. But if you put yourself out there and offer to be a resource to other people, I think that also is something that you'll ultimately benefit from. So how do you enhance skills? Maybe some of the other folks here have more in-depth ideas about that, since I haven't been so intentional about networking. But I think one of the big things is to practice, to sort of find some environments where it doesn't intimidate you to network, that there are folks that it's a safe sort of environment, and so seek out some of those opportunities. Those are the kinds of things that I think I've done throughout my career. One of the skills you have to really remember about networking is not just you're telling your story or trying to sell yourself, but you have to really be listening. So that's a skill I think that is very essential to networking. because you have to listen to the needs of the people that you are networking with and listen to what they do and what they're interested in and what they're passionate about. And that way, later on, when you come across some opportunity that if you had this partner that you know from your networking experience, you'll know enough about them and what they do to ask them to join you in this endeavor. So you have to really work on not just speaking about yourself, which is one part of it, but also listening to all the connections that you make. The next question is, when are there opportunities? And again, I think some of the other panelists will have a lot of ideas about where to seek out opportunities to network. There are the traditional ones like professional societies or serving on technical committees and that sort of thing. My experience has been that networking in less traditional or less obvious situations has benefited me a lot. Through volunteer activities, like the kinds of things that I have done with WIST, social activities, clubs or organizations that you have a common interest with some other folks. This is actually something that, when you think about the old boys network, clubs, that's what they did. They didn't just talk to each other on work situations. They talked to each other outside work, and they had common interests that brought them together and sometimes helped benefit them in a career situation. And so we can learn that, at least that part from them, that work isn't the only place that you can network, that you should look for other ways to network outside of the strict hours of business. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my experience about this. When my children were young, they went to the Argonne Child Development Center. And you might not think that the Child Development Center would be an ideal place for networking. But I served on the parent board for the Argonne Child Development Center, and I got to know people across the laboratory. And in different situations, I managed to work on projects with these different people that had very different technical backgrounds and very different roles at the laboratory at the time. And when I was serving on that board and getting to know those people better and interacting with them because our children were all together, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm getting to know this guy because he's the chief operations officer, which he happened to be. Adam Cohen and I were very good friends, so those who remember Adam. But it helped later on when we had some issues, that I knew Adam pretty well from that experience. So I think it's, I think you don't underestimate those kinds of non-work activities that you can network. The other one, which I will highlight for sure, is my involvement in the Women in Science and Technology program. I think that has allowed me to get to know women across the laboratory and men across the laboratory in a non-threatening, non-confrontational way, and we've been able to connect and build some research projects and things related to that. Usually I end up pairing somebody from my knowledge base in WIST with somebody else that I know. So I do a little bit of matchmaking, but it benefits everybody in the long run when we have more projects because of it. So I think I'll stop there because I think I took at least my 10 minutes, and I'll let Matt and others share their experience as well.
That's great. Well, that's it. I have nothing else to add to that. That was terrific. I'm going to start by asking a few questions. How many folks here are introverts? Okay, so that says a lot. Okay, how many folks here got your job through a contact or a friend or a family member, someone who was already working here or connected here? Wow. So what this shows is, even though we're introverts, we're also using the power of our own networks to further our careers. And that was a pretty good majority. I'm surprised. And I'm also part of that group. So I'm also an introvert. When I was a kid, I was painfully shy. Even throughout college, I hardly ever spoke in class. I was more withdrawn and a bit of a sponge. And today I'm, head of communications. There's the irony, right? Public affairs. But what fascinated me throughout college, and then I had to make some personal choices and some changes in my own behavior in my life, was that I wasn't good at public speaking. I wasn't good at socializing. I was painful. I found it really awkward. I didn't like going to parties because I always felt like I didn't quite fit in. And I was fascinated by the fact that I didn't have this innate ability to connect with people, and I was really troubled by this. And so I started to think about it, and because I'm introvert by nature, and started to think about structures and information flow and how sort of formal methods of sharing. And this is pre-social media, pre-Facebook, where everything is shared all the time. And what I was fascinated by the fact that I wanted to create a structure that, an organizational structure that really is network focused. So my career, I started off at the University of Chicago, and I worked in academic publishing, in sociology and anthropology, in that social science space. And so there's a lot of information I could absorb from that. But I was forced to go to academic conferences and where I would meet with academics and talk about their book projects and meet with people all day long, go to these very long dinners where I have to be sociable with these authors. And it was just so painful. But I learned some skills, and I realized that I need to be the one who's enabling others to have conversations. And that actually, if I put my mind to it, I was actually quite good at it. So fast forward many other jobs, coming to Argonne and working in communications. So when I took on this role, I decided to approach communications differently. So instead of just being at the tail end of something, right, just being the recipient of, someone published something great, we want to do a press release and get that out there, and we're just the conduit. No, there's a different way we can think about the role we play. We're really here to build opportunities for others, to create the reputation of the laboratory, and I have a lot of great folks in my shop who are better public speakers, better writers, they're really thoughtful, they're much more outgoing. And I could leverage that as well. My job is really just to put them in the right places, give them some basic instructions, and let them go. So the model we have today is one where it is about networking and being in someone else's shoes and being at the opportunity or creating that opportunity early. And I'll give you one notable example. So this, in the past year, instead of having all of my shop over in 201, sort of hunkering down, never leaving the building, we've set up this, what we call a deployed service model. So I have one communication head, one lead, who sits in each of the ALD ships, and their job is to get with the scientists, get with the programs, understand from the inside out what they need to do to be successful. And then we can be more thoughtful. So instead of just writing the press release at the tail end of something, we can say, maybe you want to do something in DC. Maybe we should work with a think tank and create an opportunity to talk about automotive research and batteries, and to then bring in others, folks from the Department of Energy and the sponsors and folks in industry, and to create an opportunity. And to sort of turning this around, really exploding the model of communications as building reputation is becoming really successful for the lab. And so all I'm trying to illustrate is that you can be an introvert, you can think about your network, but you need to be focused on it and to put some effort into it and think about how you're working with the people around you. So let me ask one more question, and then I'll turn it to Ann. How many folks lead people? Okay, so a handful, not too many, but a handful. So as you're thinking about information flow, and I think of networks and information flow combined, I'll ask you to think about this. So I've had I'll show you two models for a boss that I've had in the past. One was extremely open, wanting me to succeed, giving me opportunities, pushing me to take greater risks, challenging me just a little bit beyond my capabilities, and giving me good mentorship over time. The other was very protective and did not want to share his Rolodex. You know, these are his contacts, right? He didn't want to share them with me. You know, I'll tell you what to do, but I'm not going to give you the context for it. I'm just going to give you the little bit of information. Write that press release, and here's the information you need. You don't need to know the big picture. And these two models, ultimately, one is more successful. The former is more successful in my mind, because in leadership, ultimately making yourself completely dispensable to the organization so that your staff is successful, it opens you up to do other and bigger and better things. And so you then have more room to think about, how do I help Ann with her program, as opposed to how do I get that press release out. So that's all I have to say. It's, again, I would encourage you, John and I were talking as we came in, we both were going to had all these notes on the same book, so I'll let John talk about the book that we were.
I was hoping you would talk about.
No.
I haven't read it, but I'll make it up.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's all I have.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Schlenker, and again, Center for Transportation Research here at Argonne. Very fortunate to lead a group of very talented folks, and several of them are here today. So thank you for that support, folks. I've been here, as I said, about 4 years now at Argonne. Came from a career back in Detroit with an auto industry and really with Chrysler manufacturing. So I had an experience all in product engineering for 30+ years before I came to Argonne. When I think of mentoring in this assignment in particular, it made me reflect back, because I really started that career when I was 20 years old for Chrysler. And within 6 months, I was put into supervision of 35 people, of engineers as well as bargaining unit technicians. And here I was, this pretty young lady. And it was a daunting prospect for me. And so maybe it was trial and error for management and leadership skills, but at the same time, it was clearly apparent that I needed to be able to have mentors available to me, bounce off ideas, who could I seek guidance from, who had been through some of these same kind of issues that I might come up with, and who could I learn from those experiences. Who did I trust, who did I look up to? So that's some of the mentoring process I think that we all develop. One of the other things I quickly realized was that mentoring was not, in my mind, about career advancement. Mentoring was rather about how to navigate the system. And occasionally it's even, I'm having a bad day and I really need to vent, and who can I be vulnerable with and close an office door, and whether it's at home or whether it's at work, and just have that freedom in that space to be able to say, here's what's going on, don't judge me, don't judge, don't fix this, just listen to me. And so some of that in mentoring relationships is really what I've gotten out of. I've always had formal mentors, and I've always been a mentee, you know, as well. So always have those relationships going in a formal basis, to the point where we used to sign contracts, and still do here at Argonne for postdocs as an example. But the informal networking and mentoring that Kristen mentioned is really the bread and butter of the system. And sometimes I encourage you that you get awfully busy on a particular research project, and it's head down, and I'm doing my job, and I'm getting great results and all of that. Take time, pause, and remember that you've got to build that network. You got to develop that relationships. And as you do that, it might be 2 minutes at the coffee pot rather than hurrying back to your office. You just stop and say, hey, what's going on in your world? And you are building that network, that relationship, and even the mentor and mentees on that part. As we get to a certain stage in our career, you know, many of us feel almost a responsibility to give back. You know, for those that are younger in their engineering career, or those that are in science and still facing the same kind of challenges, And whether it be dealing with tension, dealing with conflict and difficult people, whether it be overload on work, whether it be an impossible boss, whether I might have trouble with communication skills, all of these kind of things are, in my opinion, areas you can work with a mentor. So things that a particular candidate might be interested in further developing their CV or practicing interview skills, as an example. Frequently, you know, close the door, let's do this. They have a big presentation, they have to give at a conference, and again, I think it's best if you're not in the supervisory rank chimney of that particular mentee, because then there is not fear over the vulnerability you might expose for that particular candidate. But here's a presentation they have to deliver. Come on into my office instead, and let's dry run it. Let's understand how it's going, where you might be clearer to your audience, what audience level do you need to be pitching towards, and have you got the material aimed correctly. So some of those kind of skills that are job related as well, but not necessarily talking about this particular, you know, third decimal within this data point, you know, is really left out of the mentoring process as far as I'm concerned. This is about development of the person, navigating through the culture as well as the system here, and as I said, building that network that pays back in spades over and over again. So when I was that 20-year-old young girl going into engineering, right, and getting that first paycheck and shaking in my boots, what you had to do was build relationships based on integrity, reciprocal relationships where you were giving and taking, real communication and sincerity in that communication with those people. And that first boss that I had, and so at the time, right, 20 years old, so he seemed like he was ancient, but he probably wasn't at the time. But I still have annual contact with that guy. He's in his 80s now. You know, whether it be Christmas cards or whether it be a phone call, he's even tracked me down over here, you know. So I left the company of Chrysler over 4 years ago. I continue to see a lot of the mentors that I had through the work process. They continue to give me advice to this day, and I do the same for them at times. I shared an experience the other day, and it really had to do with a tough time. And so it was a matter of call my mentor up and say, hey, will you meet with me? I'm just feeling burned out, stressed out, I'm ready to climb the walls. You know, so it was 5:30 in the morning with a meeting, and here's what's happening. And if I want to cry at that meeting, then that's what's going to happen here, and it's not going outside of the walls. You know, but it's just either a pressure cooker relief valve or it's guidance on how to navigate professionally. So remember, mentors are not just, should, in my opinion, not be bosses, not your boss. Rather, it can be your priest, it can be your neighbor, it can be your spouse, it can be your partner. All of those are part of your circle of influence in your community groups, and all of that beyond the professional memberships. And then an awful large network that you're going to build here within Argonne, both horizontal, you know, and the vertical on that front. So, with that, I'll let you speak and we look forward to questions and answers.
Okay, so I'm John. I'm currently the Deputy Chief Operations Officer for the lab. I've had this job, I guess, for about 2 years now. Before that, I was at the APS, and I was there for about 6 years. Before that, I was at Northwestern. So I've had a varied career. I started off actually as a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and then decided after a couple of co-ops that I didn't really want to do what bachelor's degrees in engineering did.
Come on.
So I went on to grad school. I raised my hand when said who was an introvert. I mean, I'm certainly fall square within that category. And when it comes to networking, I think I probably spent the first half of my career ignoring networking, ignoring even the existence of networks. And the reality is, of course, you have a network. We're all social creatures. We all have bonds to other people, and that is what forms your network, whether you call it that or not. That is what it is. And that has a huge impact on you, and you have a huge impact on other people. And that scales in many, many different ways. And you can see, and I've seen indications of that over time. Probably one of the most stark examples was when the APS was built back in '92, and one of my scientists, because I built beamlines at the APS for part of my career. One of the scientists there from Dow gave a speech and had dinner with Martha Krebs, who I think was the Secretary of Energy at the time. I may be getting the name wrong. And he's sitting there talking, and the Secretary of Energy is talking to her, her companions about future funding for the APS, about how they would be able to garner the support to raise the $100 million a year. And my scientist said, well, what are you talking about? I mean, this is a fantastic facility. It's going to do great things for science. It's going to, push technology in the United States forward. What do you mean you can't fund it? And the secretary said to him, Brian, I hate to tell you this, but you're a little naive. The merits of the science is only about 30% of the decision as to whether something actually gets money. The rest of it is interactions, it's politics, it's how everything fits within the national social fabric. So networks are incredibly important, and whether you choose to ignore them or work on them, they're always there. Another thing is that always confused me when I ignored the concept of networks was, wow, people are paying me to do something here. I'm here, I'm building beam lines, at that point I was forming bridges with industry, with the APS. In fact, my role at that time was actually as a bridge builder between the APS industry and the university, Northwestern University. And they were paying me to do this, and I could never figure out why. And I would go home to my wife and I would say, I spent all my day in meetings and they're paying me for this. And she would look at me and she would say, and they're paying you good money to do that too. Now, I later learned that there's a reason for that, and this is the kind of the book that Matt was referring to. Networks are of different sizes and different shapes, and you live in a network which has a particular size and shape. That's a function of who you are. Those networks can be closed or they can be open. And what I mean by a closed network is that if you know your friends or the people you interact with, and all they associate with is their own. So you're forming a little cloister, a little group, or a little team. And that kind of network is actually really good for some things. If you've got to get something done, if you've got to put a team together to target, like a SEAL team or a task force, that's a great structure in order to be able to get that done. On the other extreme is what are called completely open networks, where you're kind of at the middle of this hub. The people that you talk to don't really talk to each other. They talk to other people. And if you do that right, that is actually putting you in what's called a broker position, where you are actually helping different organizations and different, you're helping to build bridges across other people's networks. And it turns out that if you look at the way that society and companies value people in terms of pay, in terms of promotions, they tend to value that broker position quite a bit more than people who are completely closed. Now, that's not to say that people who are completely closed are bad or in bad networks, nothing at all. All I'm trying to say is that you need to be sensitive to your role in your network and how you're having impact, because it does affect you, and it affects people around you. So how do you get there? Well, I would say that I learned probably my most important lessons about networks from my mom and my dad. My mom told me that if in your life you can count the number of true friends that you have on one hand, you're very, very lucky. So she's talking about 3 or 4. If you have 3 or 4 people that you go through your life with, and so what she's talking about there is she's talking about the quality of the relationship. I mean, how many have more than 200 Facebook friends, right? That's not your network. Your network is the number of people that you interact with and that you have actually real interactions with. And it turns out that we all have a bandwidth. We can't hold 100 people in that kind of closeness. You can typically hold about a dozen. That seems to be about the maximum number of real relationships that anyone can hold at one time. And so if you're going to form a new one, then something has to go. So what does that say in terms of network? Your networks are constantly changing because we don't go through life with all of the same kinds of people. My current role is as a broker. My job is to go across the organization, across the laboratory, and try to build the bridges that need to be built in order to solve fairly gnarly institutional problems that in some sense sometimes have been ignored for 20, 30 years. So that's actually what I do now, is I actually try to bring people together to get things solved. So how do you do that? Well, I don't know how you do it. The way I have to do it is, and it's been said before, you have to do a lot of listening. And I have to be what I call multilingual. I speak different languages. I have a background in engineering. I have a background in science. I've been in the administrata. I go talk to the DOE. And so you'll often hear these days the term code swapping, right? You change your language depending on who you're talking with. And anybody that's actually multilingual, you do this all the time, right? If your native language is not English, you're code swapping when you're speaking English and you're going back and forth. And the interesting thing is the way that you think changes depending on the language that you adopt. So I do it by having to be multilingual. Something else I try to have done over time is I try to have what I call my kitchen cabinet. I try to have a few people in my life that are going to tell me what they think about something. If I come to them, I really want to know what they think. Not what they think I want to hear, or even what is right or wrong, but just what they think. Because what I've learned is if I can find 4 or 5 people, and 4 is really lucky, and I go to them and they tell me really what they think, then I can take those different opinions, and somewhere in the mix I might be able to see the reality of what I'm ever trying to explore. And I found that that's very hard to do, because to get somebody to tell you what they think is very vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable place that you're putting people in. So that, again, speaks to the quality of the relationship that you build. You have to be able to give that in order to be able to get that. So that's it.
Okay, we're going to open up the floor for some questions, but before we do that, I realized I failed to mention or introduce myself. My name is Lisa Durham, and along with Christina Negri, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, we are the interim co-WIST program initiators. And we personally would like to thank you, too, for taking time out of your day and coming today. Thank you. Okay, so with that, if there's questions. Oh, okay. So the question was, what was the book? Go ahead.
It's called Brokerage and Closure, but it's really tough to read. But there's lots of this indication in other literature too. So you just have to look up social networking research and you'll see it.
Is it worth it? It's really hard to read. Is it worth reading it?
No. I would say there are probably other books that can give you the same message. You actually have an MBA in this.
It is I took a class with a guy. It's a tough read. It's very academic sociology, but if you go online, I'm sure you'll find papers that are more condensed versions, more maybe I probably should have come up with a few examples. But I know there are slide decks. There you go. Yeah, I know there are slide decks online by Ron Burt, and if you sort of do a search, you will find there's a really interesting graph, sort of a plot that shows pay scale and leadership charted against whether your network is closed or open, whether you're someone who's very much into creating deep knowledge in closed groups versus being a broker. And it, as John, is that this?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
That's the graph.
That's the one.
That's the graph.
Or something very similar.
If there's a marker I can put up on the
But basically, it's a very strong correlation between being a broker and really working your network and moving into a leadership position and hence getting paid more. So that's a good thing.
Well, and having more impact.
And having more impact. Or paid more.
So, all right. So in the announcement for this, you mentioned that your... I'll just yell. Is that, oh, there we go, that's the secret. So in the announcement for this program, you mentioned that people in your network may have different roles, and I don't know, I came in a bit late, you might have already talked about that. Can you tell more about where we can find more information about those kinds of roles?
So I'll start, but everybody else can say some roles. I think Anne was talking about the different relationships that you might have somebody who's a coach for you, or you might have somebody who's a technical mentor. You might have some people in your network that you're the mentor for. You might have, I have a lot of peers, people who are peers to me, and then they're the kind of people that I can go to, I think, with these tell me what you think questions, because they're not sitting above me or below me. You know, they give me really good feedback. So I think that's what we were talking about, is this, the roles that people play depend upon your relation to them in life, in an org chart, in what service you provide to them or what service they provide to you. You guys want to add something?
Yeah, well, I would just add that the notion of a broker is someone who can connect multiple groups of multiple networks together. So, and think of it this way as well. We all have our private lives, our home lives, and we have our work lives and our work networks. Some people may have a photo of their loved one on their desk at work, right? It's very rare to have a photo of your work colleagues at home, right? So, and if you have that, but it's not unheard of. I think some people really, those networks overlap completely. So I know scientists who have their work group, right? They're the PI and they have their team, and they do a lot together. They have parties together. They socialize. Their kids know each other, and that's a really it's a robust network, but it's very close and it's tight. The role of a broker is one who connects maybe my church life with my science life, right? So two different communities, but I have a role to play in having that conversation, maybe about science to those of faith, or even I'm not going to say we should be talking about religious beliefs, but at work. But I do think being able to have a conversation about that is a good thing, right? Especially as we talk about diversity and inclusion and understanding that we all come from different points, walks of life. So being that broker, I mean, that's a really key thing. And being thoughtful about the communities in which you belong is a key thing.
Did that answer your question? Yeah?
So I was just wondering if there was some source that you were getting these role names from,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just based on personal experience, I think.
Yes.
Right there. Right there's.
So my question is a little bit different about forming the relationship. So I'll give an example. My husband happens to be a very lucky guy. He manages to make friends at work. So his, just like you were saying, his private life and his work life tend to just overlap. He still goes regularly out for a beer with his former boss of 4 years ago. As a woman in a male-dominated industry, I can't have that luxury, obviously. It's very difficult to form a very friendship-related relationship with my peers, with my bosses, whatever. So how does that work? And maybe the women on the panel could contribute a little bit more. How do you form this relationship without necessarily making them your best friends, but still doing that?
So can I edit? So what you think you're asking is there a difference in which men and women network differently? Is that
maybe
kind of like that? Okay.
So I'd like to say that beyond time and place, there's also the means that we network differently or mentor differently. So one of the observations that that was noted previously was, the golf course, where a lot of men would be, and that would further the next business deal, or they build a stronger relationship, and so they might be thought of next. It influences funding and other things. Well, for some women, the relationship isn't really fostered on the golf course, right? They don't enjoy the sport. They have other life demands that don't allow them to do the 3 or 4 hours on Saturday or during the week. And so some of that really means that the time and opportunity has to shift for women. And that can be then lunches, that can be stopping at Starbucks or Caribou or whatever for the coffee and having a network and a mentor-mentee kind of meeting. That it has to be more core work hours or something rather, because there's so many other demands on family time as an example. So awareness of that issue, where the relationship foundations are cemented in different ways, I think, for men and women. And then your other question over, are we just different in the relationship itself, in the conversation that we want to have between men or women? One of the things that I've commented to a couple of other people previously was that, as I look at a 30-plus year career now, that one of the most striking changes that I witnessed was when the men that were, the CEOs and the senior vice presidents, when all of a sudden they started having daughters that were 25 years old, and they wanted the absolute best for their daughter, right, that she was going to succeed in her career, and there'd better be no roadblock in front of her when she was equally as qualified as somebody else, or far more. And so they then translated that family observation back into the workplace, and all of a sudden became far more embracing as a culture within laboratories and within companies. So that's been a pronounced shift in the past 20 years that I've observed, and applaud, to the clouds and back on that front. So I think even some of the relationships between men and women in the workplace are changing and becoming more empathetic, as well as the technical and the robust conversation on that front, just about science. More willing to expose themselves and have some in those other guiding discussions about work life or about other relationships.
I'll make a couple comments. Am I on? Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. Anne's comments were dead on. I really enjoyed them. Agree with them fully. I was just trying to think of some practical ideas for you in terms of how to foster a relationship that is a little more friendly. So we typically have group lunches that we go to. So if you can encourage that in your group, that's one thing I would try to do, because then it's a little work. We sometimes say we're not going to talk about work when we go on our group lunches, but we always do. You just can't help it. And I think that's the thing about trying to do something outside of work. Work is going to creep back in, which could be a good thing, because then you get to have some of these discussions that you're not on a deadline for, and it might be a little bit more open conversation. I would also encourage you to try and develop some of those relationships outside of your immediate line of command, chain of command, work group. I know that the Women in Science and Technology organization here was really important for me when I first came as a graduate student. I was in the nuclear engineering, it was the reactor analysis engineering, reactor analysis division at that time, and there were very few women in that group. And I came out to actually a women's technical symposium because there was one more senior woman who encouraged me to participate, to go in, and I met women from the, it was chemical technology division then, and we started having regular lunches. They invited me to their ladies' lunches that they were having, basically. And it helped me just to hear their perspectives too, because it gave me a little more confidence then to reach out to, you know, the guys in the division and my boss to even suggest something like a group lunch. You know, sometimes that suggestion has to come from us if they're not already doing that kind of thing. The third thing I thought of was, if you're staying within your organization, maybe you don't worry so much about the boss, but you worry about the peer group, because the peer group has as much influence on your network, your ability to network, and your ability to connect with other people. You should relate well to the peers in your organization as well. I thought of a fourth one. Sorry. I think the culture is changing generally because men are facing a lot of the issues that used to be exclusively women's issues in the past. The comments about, you know, having competing demands for time, you know, to go home and spend with the family, to take care of the children. The men of these next generations are taking a lot higher percentage of their time on that, if it's not 50-50 now, you know. So I think they want to be involved more. So you might have some men in your group. I'm getting a no here. She can comment on it. So hopefully there's a shift in the works because of the demands on them, as well as the demands on women have historically been. Yeah, I think they want to respond to my comment.
Yeah, this is just a follow-up comment or question, I don't even know. Because I very much share the same trouble, so perhaps we should talk. But I've tried a couple of things, and I've tried to invite people for lunch, and it happened a couple of times, and then everyone gets busy. And I don't know if it is the way I invite people, maybe I'm not cool enough, or there's my eyes, the eyes of another culture interpreting what's going on, and I still have a number of question marks there, or simply people are just very busy. I don't know how to interpret that, to really know when it is a good time to give up on at least someone. I mean, not in general, I don't think I will ever do that, but like, all right, I invited you one time, another time, you constantly say it would be nice, but then it doesn't happen. And at some point, I'm like depressed and I give up. Comments? Thanks.
She definitely wants to do lunch with you. So here's you came out to this seminar and you built a network connection.
You got one now. That's one good. Let me get this gentleman in the back.
Hello? Yeah. So this is a question regarding the concept of speaking multiple languages. So say if you wanted to network with somebody with whom you don't speak the same language as that person, so how would you go about doing that?
You listen a lot, and you listen. I mean, it's okay. So you listen a lot, and I think there's another thing that has to go that goes before that, and something my dad taught me. He said, John, he told me one time, John, no matter where you go, as far as your travels, just remember people are people, and at some level, at some basic level, you know, everybody's struggles are your struggles. And so where that plays into this, when you go into big different scientific cultures or different engineering cultures, you know, there's always a certain level of arrogance that you can translate into that culture, and you have to be very conscious of it. And if you let your own arrogance, not saying you're arrogant, I mean, I'm pretty arrogant, but I'm not saying you are. If you let your own arrogance blind you to the listening, you won't be able to do the mapping that you need to make, because I truly believe engineering and science, it's all the same underlying language. So it's really a matter of remapping what the local language is into something that you understand, and then translating it back. And then understanding what the implicit assumptions are. I mean, engineers and scientists are perfect examples. You think they're the same? Totally different, right? The only thing that's different, the same, is that they both use math, right? But the cultures are different, you know, how they approach problems are different, the outcomes are different. But if you don't appreciate that difference going into the culture, you just get shut out. So I would say that's, try to put your biases aside and then listen and then remap. That's what I try to do.
I'll add, I'm going to connect these two questions together just to add on to this. I think finding common cause is a really great way to bring two different groups together. So I'm trying to think of a good example. But a lot of the work I do, I work with the lab director and with scientists, and I try to help them tailor their speech to a particular audience. So sometimes I'll play the fool, right? So I'll talk to a senior scientist and I'll ask a question, tell me about your research, and she'll or he'll rattle something off, and it's very complicated language that I just don't understand. So then I'll ask an extremely basic question, making myself a little bit, making them understand that I don't understand a word of what they're saying, right? And that they need to, I need to adjust what I'm saying. I need, because Matt doesn't understand it because he's an idiot, So, but it helps them. My job is to prepare them to speak with other audiences at a level that audience can get. So Congress, the media, and it may, I didn't say that they're, idiots, I'm just saying. Exactly, but you have to understand your audience when you're going into a conversation as best you can. So if you're a scientist and you really want to talk to, you want to go to your kid's school and talk about what you do, and I'm looking at Meredith, who's our education programs manager, new to the lab. You're not going to, you need to think about where that person is in their education, in their life. So find that common, understand the audience, find that common cause. To the point about not, how long do you try? I keep asking you to lunch and you keep saying no. I have two thoughts about it. One, you keep trying because you don't always get there. But then at some point you do give up and you move on. And I think my approach with working with scientists and engineers is I work with the willing. I work with those who actually want to work with the media or work to share their stories with other audiences. If you're unwilling, then why would I try to force you to do it? So just understanding that everyone is in their own place and you're coming from your place and finding that commonality if it's there. If not, you move on.
So I wanted to add one thing to that, which just reminded me. So, asking questions is a very powerful way to break into cultures and to understand and create common understanding. But there's a caveat to that. You have to be genuine. You have to be asking the questions to understand and not to posture or to try to trip somebody up. And I've seen that happen, right? But in my experience, if you really are trying to understand, the conversation will always, not always, but most of the time will come to a place where you can really communicate and make those connections.
Can I ask one more? The graph. You got to talk about the graph.
Okay, so I'll tell you.
Close
with the graph. Okay, so this is a graph. It turns out that you can take your network, so you're connected to other people. And this is you in the center. And there is a numerical factor that you can calculate called the network constraint, which is really nothing more than the number of closed connections divided by all possible. And so and you normalize it by the number of total connections, and you get a number from 0 to 1. So 0 means that you're connected to people who are not connected to each other. And a 1 means that you're only connected to people who are only connected to each other. So it's a mathematical thing from network theory. It's pretty simple. First time I saw this graph was in a class, and the axis here was salary, how much money you make. It turned out this thing called Z-score. It could be anything you want, but they used money. And I'm in a class, it's a networking class, and I'm in a room full of engineers and physicists, and this is social science. So they put up a graph that looks like this. I mean, the scatter data is just all over the place. And when they showed the graph, the room got very silent, because while you could argue with what is the functional form that goes through this line, right? You can't argue with the trend, right?
Yeah,
it was
right.
clearly more up here, less down here. So these plots are all over the place. They're normalized for age, race, you name it. If you take any group of people and you normalize it to whatever the true constraint is, taking out all their factors, organizations, because these are all organizational type results upon you, whether you've been promoted or you get salary or whatever. This is just saying that organizations tend to value people who are brokers as opposed to people who are totally enclosed networks on average. But there's a caveat. You have to be a broker. So if you're in this kind of position and you're not trying to build bridges, but you're trying to withhold information, you're a roadblock. And then, let me tell you, the organization has a completely different response to you in those situations. So if you're truly being a broker, you're perceived as more valuable. That's not to say that other people are not valuable. We're just talking about on averages here. I mean, clearly, the people that created the iPhone, they did that in a small team, and they all got really well rewarded, right? So it just really depends on where you are. You just need to be cognizant of it.
So how do you prioritize the quality of that relationship? You can have many relationships useless.
Correct.
You can have few very effective.
That's correct.
So that's
right.
I don't think it's can be easily parameterized in that curve.
I want to say one thing to that. It's not just having a network, but it's how you use the network you have, right? So if you're out there just building networks, just to build networks, you're showing up at cocktail parties and giving your card out. I know what I do with those people. I throw the card away because I really don't.
But my question is really
so it's the quality. I'm saying that maybe this doesn't represent that, but the quality of your network and the relationships you have is important. It's very important.
I just want to make a comment about the chart and what you were saying about the organizations valuing that. If they value that, because at some level we're in a scientific organization, so our bread and butter is the research, the publications. So it's obviously undeniable that it is beneficial for the individual itself to have an open network, use it well, have strong connections, et cetera. But whether it really will be recognized by the organization is not intuitive, and it's not straightforward. It may or may not, depending on the structure of the organization itself.
Exactly. That's why there's huge scatter in this data, right? So this is just sort of on average, across bankers and researchers, broad categories of people. So the point is you just want to be aware.
I just want to make a comment. It's very important indeed to have your papers published, but at some level, to have real impact, you need to be part of big collaboration. You need to be part of big project that will bring, at the end, you are valued as much as you bring. It's money at the end. I know we don't get it at the beginning. At the beginning, it's all about my research, my exciting results. It's not going to get you anywhere. He told you 30%. If I knew that 30% is only the science needed, I wouldn't do science, honest. But this is the truth, and you have to grow. This is the reality. We are doing science. It's only 30% of the success. You have to get it, and build your network, bring more money, and be successful.
So if I could add one thing to this as well, there's another advantage that a network provides you, which is a vision advantage, right? So you are able to see things that you would otherwise be blind to. So an opportunity, if Qatar's out there walking the halls of Forrestal, talking to DOE, understanding the challenges that are happening in the Department of Energy, and also the opportunities. Oh, there's a new funding thing that people are talking about. They really want to make a push into biofuels. Then if she sees that before someone else may be able to rethink what she's working on. Maybe I'm going to switch from nuclear physics and do work in biofuels. Probably not. But you see trends quicker. You see things across the field of nuclear physics that you may not otherwise know about. And so having a network, my point in this, it may impact your science, and you may actually make a different choice. But I'm not a scientist, so I can't really say.
But for funding opportunities, when you know of them before they are public, it allows you a few months ahead to prepare your proposal. This can make a difference between succeeding and failing. So, yeah.
It's sort of that same point that I made earlier, where head down, you think that doing sound science and engineering work is going to bring and save the world and bring all the acclaim and then a steady stream of funding afterward. You know, the 30% number or whatever it is very important, but it's the relationships, folks, so spend time on it as well.
The earliest you realize, better be on.
And I think to go full closures, what Matt said, for many of us who are introverts, it's hard. It's hard to do that networking.
Well, so I want to say, it is hard.
It can be hard.
But you have to do what's true to yourself, right? So for example, I'm not a big party guy, right? I don't actually associate.
Really?
No, sorry, Matt. I go weld things, right? I'm at my happiest tinkering, right? So I don't play golf. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't socialize with people at work. I've got a family and lives in Evanston, right? But in my day to
Jeez, you're boring.
I know, I'm terrible. But in my day to day, I try to make my encounters meaningful with people, you know, and I do try to think about the connections that I'm making here. And I think if you're just a little more deliberate about your own interactions, that will go a long way. Because then people will remember you. They'll remember that, oh, well, you know, so-and-so talked to me about, you know, nuclear physics, and I want to go do that. What you talk about has to be relevant to the environment you're talking about. Talking about my church in this environment doesn't do anything for me.
Create trouble.
Again.
Possible.
All right, I want to let's give him another applause. Thank you.